Welcome to a roundtable discussion for the Federal News Network series, Delivering the Tech That Delivers for Government. I'm Vanessa Roberts, and during this series, sponsored by Future Tech, we are talking with and sharing the expertise of tech leaders at federal systems integrators, who often work behind the scenes to provide the enterprise infrastructure tools and the capabilities that ensure their employees can help agencies deliver on their missions. Today is part one of a discussion featuring four such smarties. Joining me at the table are Bernie Tomasky, the Vice President of Enterprise IT at SAIC, Cedric Sims, the Senior Vice President of Enterprise Innovation and Integration at MITRE, Eric Nelson, the Senior Vice President for CACI's Enterprise IT Operating Group, and Rick Schindel, Leader of Federal Systems Integrator Programs at Future Tech. Welcome to the table, everybody.
Thank you. Hello.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, it's great. This should be a super conversation. You guys have an immense amount of experience, and I know that a lot of that is involved in helping people inside your company and across the enterprise be able to really help the agencies that your companies serve. So let's just dive right in, shall we?
Very good.
Let's
do it.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's start out by just kind of taking a little bit of a time to talk about what is each of your IT lifecycle management approaches, both from that installation standpoint, so from what you're doing, but also relative to those end users out there, those people who are on the front lines really delivering these services and agencies. Why don't we just start at the end? We'll start with you, Eric.
Okay, thanks. So really our approach is to focus on the end user, because the end user is ultimately who's providing the mission, who is doing the work, is actually voting on the value of the IT system if they can get their job done. So we really focus in on, is that value creation being delivered month over month, year over year to the end user. We also couple that with like a COBIT methodology to evaluate how mature each of our programs are in being able to move up the chain from the standpoint of delivering services that are dependable and repeatable. So we take a look at that and then ultimately come back to surveying the end user and saying, are you happy with what you've got? And if it's not 95, 96, then we figure out what we can do.
All right.
Yeah, I think we're trying to center around that end user experience, and there's multiple ways of doing that. Not just a traditional kind of help desk surveying kind of thing. A big thing is built around user personas and starting to create, persona groups so that we can kind of customize that life cycle solutions out to that end user. And there's some great digital experience monitoring tools out there now that really can, take the guesswork out of how the performance is of the device, how long does it take to boot up your device, how long does it take to reach applications. And when you start to monitor that, you can start to then right size the devices that go out to the people, and then also start doing proactive remediation, because you're seeing the problem even before the end user sees it and starts to complain about it. But customers really want intuitive service interactions. They want always on, always available, and they really often want to solve some of their own problems themselves. So it's all about trying to, get ahead of that user, and also really start to provision things in a way that focuses on what does that user do, what is their user group, and so really that's kind of where we're trying to take the IT lifecycle.
Well, as my colleagues have said, it really is about the end user. It's about mission enablement and making sure that they have the right tools and capabilities at the right time. We have different personas or archetypes within our organization. Some are research and development engineers. Others we need to be able to meet basic needs of our sponsors that we have within the MITRE Corporation. So to that end, we have to meet laboratory needs as well as traditional desktop operations needs. We do have a process that we use to survey not only our sponsors but also our end users to make sure they're getting the capabilities that they need. In a large time, we'll find major shifts that will cause us to have to change our plans for our life cycles, and looking forward to discussing that more as we go forward.
Right.
So we support the federal systems integrator community at Future Tech, and what we try to do is keep in mind the end mission, right? Everybody's trying to support the mission. That requires a lot of flexibility, both in terms of keeping mind on technical debt that's out there in order to make sure those users are operationally efficient, keeping in mind security, if they are working in a secure environment versus a non-secure environment, and sometimes even geographically, where are they geographically? So we try and help the federal systems integrators
provide that common experience across their user community in support of the mission.
Right. I think something that's interesting that came out of that was that idea that, well, personas, of course, but the proactivity piece is such a huge part today, and has really become more important because people do want stuff immediately. Like, there's no patience, right?
No.
I'm on the thing and it needs to work now. But also talk about how things have really evolved and changed, because I think there's been a major shift. It was starting before COVID, but it really took off after COVID. That whole idea of the hybrid infrastructure. People are working anywhere all the time, and they want to work fully wherever they are, right? Maybe talk about that a little bit.
So definitely an all-in cloud strategy that really, went on steroids during the COVID process. But absolutely, they want access with any device, anytime, anywhere. And there's a lot of enabling things that have got to happen to make that work. But a big driver is to get stuff out of on-prem centers and make it cloud-based, implementing role-based access control so that way they can access the right applications. And then for us, it was, how do we drive all of our corporate applications to communicate out to that community? So particularly a lot of them are on government site, they're using government equipment, they don't necessarily have access back to our environment. So having the ability on a mobile device to do everything from timekeeping to keeping up with the, the corporate news and stuff is critical. So everything's gone with mobile applications now to deal with it. And our company is still largely, remote working. So other than the ones that are on customer facilities. So in that environment, we've designed everything right down to how the service desk tier 0 self-help, self-heal stuff works. It's all around how do we, deal with a remote environment like that. So but COVID was at least an upside to it was a way to really drive companies to get their stuff into a cloud environment and enable that.
Yeah, it sped a lot of that forward, for sure.
By a decade, probably at least. We were headed that direction, but that really pulled it in probably 10 years from a force standpoint. Bernie, you touched on a lot of the self-healing stuff. I think the hardware OEMs have done a nice job in bringing some of that technology forward. We find that having the ability to support customers in a hybrid environment is critical at this point. You have to be able to do that. So companies are determining that balance of when in office, when remote. I have 4 kids and they're all in the workforce, and they struggle sometimes with, okay, am I going into the office today? Am I not going into the office? So that's a real balance that companies are trying to figure out.
One of the benefits of that forced march that we all went on was that we moved forward some plans regarding the user experience. Because it was necessary, we optimized initially around really providing a robust experience in the office. But now suddenly that same experience needs to happen, from a remote location, right? And so that allowed us to re-architect aspects of our security architecture to allow us to then have that same experience even in a remote location the same way that you would have in the office. We have implemented a return to office, and fortunately that's generally gone smoothly. We'll can have a discussion on a different session regarding that. But one of the aspects of that is that there are some now that have found that our hybrid operating environment is actually a better experience than being in the office.
Right.
So now we're doing some additional things to make sure the office experience is just as robust as the hybrid experience became.
Well, and I think you have to balance the security requirements against the load that customers are experiencing, both in end user devices and in the data center infrastructure, in managing that capability, because you can't overburden everybody with. I believe you mentioned earlier before we went on air. Security is it's a balancing act in terms of what's capable versus what's available.
Yeah, we saw 2 different ends of the spectrum during that, which was you had that everybody trying to figure out how to now work off of their phone, their end device, getting on camera at the right time, not looking bad when they get on camera, balancing all of those kinds of things. And then we also have a lot of intelligence customers that we had to figure out how to, how you going to fit people 6 feet apart, how you going to do shifts. And the real change that we saw in technology was that it really pushed forward that capability, like for CSFC. A lot of our customers working on bases wanted to be able to do classified communications, but couldn't go in. So it really catapulted that forward in those communities, and it hasn't moved. It hasn't changed. They still like that approach. And then the other end of the spectrum's the civilian agencies. They're still home. We hire people to contracts that are working service desks that never come in. I've never seen them.
Right.
They work at home. So it's kind of catapulted that work experience forward a lot.
Do you find that creating your personas changed through that too, because the personas had to evolve a lot from where they were before, and that you have to have multiple personas for individuals, because they have different needs depending on where they are and what they're doing?
It really depends on what applications they're trying to access, whether those applications have been cloud enabled. So that can be the case, and you're going to have times where you're going to have somebody that's starting to do development work, and they're going to need kind of a different criteria. But by and large, if you've kind of progressed along that path,
right,
you've got to the point where you don't need to necessarily do that. But if you've got a lot of on-prem environments, whether they be labs or anything else, that still becomes a challenge, because you'd really want to design, your IT lifecycle around how do I minimally kind of refresh devices and
Right.
upgrade devices, and that becomes a little more challenging if you've got multiple roles somebody's filling, because then you have to kind of always go to that high performance end. But
You brought the next thing I was going to talk about, which is what are the challenges that you see that are most common, and then relative to that other end of it is like the challenges you have in actually supporting the mission at these agencies, because those are two different types of challenges, right? But yet they have an intersection point. Maybe you want to jump in.
Sure. So there's some new things that are ahead of us, right? We've had the benefit of doing some significant investment in our infrastructure to really drive our infrastructure transformation efforts. But we still have to maintain some compatibility, some interoperability, if you will, with some of our sponsor-facing work. Mm-hmm. And our sponsors have not all had the same opportunity to make investments. They're waiting for budget cycles. They're waiting for acquisitions to go through. And so we can't get too far ahead in terms of some of our work that we're doing. So that has been a stressor for us. But we found a good medium to be able to find ways that we can still interact, work, interoperate. But again, we can't get too far ahead of our sponsors in that regard.
yeah, I was going to say, so, for us, we take a higher security posture on the assumption that, and the reality is if you're really standardizing anyway, you're going to end up saving money if you can do that. But by just going to a higher IL level to do something to secure your environment to a higher level classification with the customer just makes it that much easier. So we try not to have to deal with supporting multiple levels. We just try to protect the data and go to a higher security level.
Right. A little bit of
gate,
standardization to address it. What kind of challenges are you guys seeing here?
So a different point of view, I think, in supporting our federal customers. I think one of the biggest challenges is the transient nature, especially in the DoD side, of all the leadership change. So when you're trying to create a 5-year plan, it gets changed sometimes every 2 years. So what we found very successful is being able to create a roadmap that then is transferred from one to the other as far as, look, this doesn't really change any leadership aspect of it. This is just the technology roadmap. So take the emotion out of it and talk more about what's needed for the end users to be able to keep that going forward. So that's one aspect. The other is cloud is a big push, but if we take a look at our Oconus customers, not so successful there.
Right.
Because they cannot, they can't pop back through JRSS, come back to the States. It's just, the latency is ridiculous. So looking at how to solve that becomes a little bit more challenging. And so that's one of the areas that we're trying to take on to figure out how we actually get that service out, in countries where you have to also deal with what the country aspects are, and it needs to be on U.S. soil, obviously, and that's not out there. So big challenge.
That's been a huge focus of DoD organizations too, trying to figure out how to do that, right?
Yeah.
Without setting up full networks, full systems, and full environments in those locations. How can they, actually be tactical at the edge, right? It's been a huge challenge, and they've been looking at it too on their side. So, still stuck.
I think one of the biggest challenges has been the pace of technological change that we've witnessed over the last I'll say even 5 years, right? We started to go through the cloud environment starting about 15 years ago, where that started to become pretty popular, and then you throw on the AI ML just turbocharge over the last few years that everybody's like, oh my God, I have to go do this. So the pace of change that customers are going through is enormously challenging for them, and setting proper expectations of what is capable and what's still kind of a science project, I think is a big one. When you speak geographically, again, we're working with our mutual customers are all working with governments around the world, and you need to be able to address those geographically. We started servicing customers globally about 4 years, started the process about 4 years ago, and it's hard, right? It's you have multiple time zone differences, you have multiple currencies, you have multiple contracting vehicles. It's very difficult, but it's a challenge that I think is critical to meet in order to provide that common architecture for our customers.
Right. It's a 24/7 around-the-clock demand that you have to somehow support wherever the players are.
Right.
Whether they're internally on your team or they're at the agencies that you're supporting.
Right.
And it's really difficult to build an infrastructure support organization, with your top talent still serving, aspects of your operation that might be, 12 hours on the other side of the, right?
Right.
And so that's that aspect of it, and especially as I think we're all experiencing some fairly significant growth through USG needs overseas. It's a challenge to actually support our people that are out there as effectively as those that are domestic.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other challenges anybody wants to talk about?
Those weren't big enough?
Those weren't big enough? Those weren't painful enough? Well, let's also talk about it, on the flip side of that, how do you gauge success? Like, when do you know, we're doing this right? What are the things that you use yourselves to say, all right, our team is doing this the right way. Let's keep repeating that. Let's stop doing those things that are not working. Who wants to jump in?
I'll go ahead and jump in. So we've spent many years measuring, satisfaction of our end users, and that's very important. But we've actually found it more effective to actually measure the satisfaction of our sponsors. So we have an annual engagement with our sponsors to understand how are they receiving the support that we provide to them. We feel that generally is a better measurement, because if we feel like we're supporting our end users effectively, then we can actually see that value being provided to our sponsors, and so that's a key aspect that we've been using as a key metric. And beyond that, we look at the typical sort of performance characteristics that you look at on infrastructure, and the demand is insatiable. And so being able to understand where those inflection points are and being responsive to that is a very key aspect of being successful going forward.
Right.
Yeah, I'll add to that. One thing we do on most of our major programs is do a survey. I call it marriage counseling. So we take and get 10 to 15 leaders on the government side and kind of just interview them through a set of questions, and then take on our side those same questions and then figure out, hey, do we see the gaps the same, or is there a big difference? And we do that actually every year, and every year we learn something that really helps move the team forward, because communication breakdown is the biggest barrier, I think, to achieving results. So the only thing I'll add to that is we think that, how do we gauge success is that we have happy customers, and that we're not having end users have to use out-of-date material to be able to to deploy and do their mission. And the ultimate that we look for is that they hire us back. So when we get our
always a good
second
sign,
contract,
right? We're going
Vote
back.
of confidence there, right?
Bernie?
Yeah, well, for us, we can all look at CPAR scores and say, well, that's great, we're doing great, but everybody knows in a recompete, that doesn't necessarily win the day, right? So for us, our focus is really not just on how we're kind of scoring with that customer and the satisfaction of that customer that day. For us, our focus is a little bit more on, are we driving innovation to the customer? Are they, because if you're happy with the service you have today, but we all know our customers are clamoring for more innovation, are you introducing innovation from day one of a contract, throughout that contract to that customer, or are you just kind of making them happy with what they bought 2 years ago or something? Right. So, and the other thing is, everybody's measuring SLAs and KPIs. The challenge you have is you often have multiple contractors doing different pieces. So by the time it gets to an end user, it's gone through a network, somebody supports a device, maybe somebody else is running the service desk. You've got all these hands at play, and everybody can meet their SLAs, but at the end of the day, the end user is not feeling it. And that's the reality of it. So what's more important is saying, well, that's great, we'll still manage those, they're good performance indicators, but really, where's the experience with the end user, and whether that's experience level agreements that you manage and implement versus just SLAs and KPIs, but you've got to get to that point where you're more holistically looking at the whole workflow. And that leads to the biggest challenge, which is everybody wants to do workflow automation, but quite often you're navigating through multiple contractors to get that automation in place on different contracts, different vehicles, different motivations. So, that's always kind of that challenge. Everybody wants to do RPA and workflow automation, but that's really a horizontal set of processes that all go to that end user. Right. And you've really got to, there's a lot of policy and governance that's got to go into how you get that to happen across multiple, contractors.
Well, that's the change management issue, right?
Yeah.
That you can never forget about.
Yeah.
And also the size and scope of some of these organizations makes that really hard.
Yeah.
Right.
And one shout out to the government here for a process at the NRO. So lots of service providers there trying to get to the same goal. We're all rated with a shared destiny goal, and so we all get to sink or swim together. So government's recognizing the dependencies that are there, and that's an important how well you work together.
Do you find that need for collaboration with multiple contractors is also a key factor in figuring out what's the best way to help both that end user but also your teams?
Well, for us, we have we call it U-centric service management framework, but really it's the MSI SIAM, it's the whole governance horizontally across your entire estate, right? And I think that's a key component, and we're seeing that more and more now. I think a lot of our customers are saying, I know I need to put that in place. I can't stovepipe, contracting officer and a COTAR to every single contract separately, and this is my people and this is mine. They're getting that concept that if I really want to start doing automation, if I really want to improve the end user experience, I've got to start to look at governing my IT across the estate. And that's where kind of having a good service integrator management model and approach on their side really helps, and we're seeing that more and more now. Everyone is aggressively trying to say, how do I put in that type of model to govern my IT environment?
So because we only support the federal systems integrator and not the end user government, right? That's what we specialize in, and it's a little bit easier for us because it's more of a commercial to commercial relationship, which I think helps. So our focus is making your organizations more efficient, more capable, being able to leverage technology from the OEMs in a more agreeable way, and then allowing you to see those efficiency savings, the cost savings, et cetera, in order to support your customer a little bit easier. So I think it makes, we drive a lot of KPIs, et cetera, for our customers, and it gives them good insight that they can then leverage in support of the end user government. So I think that commercial to commercial relationship is a little bit easier for us than someone that's focused on supporting the FSIs, but also supporting the federal government.
Right. Have you all found, this is a follow-on question, because I've heard several people talking about this recently, this move from user experience more to customer experience, right? And also employee experience or total experience, that there's a lot of consistency now for that end user wherever they are, whether they're the government person that you're trying to support or your employee. Understanding that whatever that gap is that you find, both people or both parties or both groups and teams are having those gaps. Are you guys also finding that to be true? I don't know. You talked about that gap analysis, and it made me think about that.
Well, I think it's interesting because in the discussion there were two kind of big areas. One is what the expectation is of the contract that was awarded.
Right.
That doesn't
Right.
necessarily include all the innovation that's needed. But then there's also, everything in IT comes down to an OEM or a vendor that's providing it. And of course they want to sell everything in their stack, but it may not be needed. So it's kind of that being able to sit down at the table and have a true strategy discussion of what is the right phased deployment. Sometimes it is rip and replace and just get it out there because you got to have that out front. Other times it's more about this is the right way to roll this out, and we don't need all those modules of ServiceNow right now. Let's start with these. So we're finding that there's that tension that you have to get to, and we actually established something called an integration cell on our programs to get everybody to have that conversation just like we're having here, because there's different points of view. You have to get it on the table to know whether it's going to be successful. Everybody is allowed to have that conflict, but you stack hands and say, okay, here's how we're going together, goal number 1, goal number 2.
Right.
It's interesting you're talking about a gap. We're also finding that there's a lot of overlap, and to the degree to which, to the point of the different modules that might be implemented, it seems like a lot of our platform providers are now kind of overlapping capabilities, and so we find like we're buying the same thing multiple times, and that's not desirous, right? So you can't do without any one of them, but we feel like we're paying multiple times for the same capabilities. So we're constantly trying to evaluate what our requirements are against the capabilities and the roadmaps of our vendors. And some have been more forthcoming than others, having discussions about where they're actually headed so we can make plans. Right. But we really need additional transparency in the community to be able to make better decisions on behalf of our federal customers.
Right. That's what you were saying too, Bernie, to a degree.
Yeah, and it is true. I mean, there's a lot of platforms out there that are 25% deployed, right? And I think everybody uses ServiceNow as an example. And yeah, if you're licensing a full end-to-end platform and only using it for ticketing, then you're probably not getting much bang for your buck. But our philosophical has been a tool and a platform itself is meaningless without good integration to your environment and your other tools. So, our focus tends to be more on, you do the analysis of alternatives, you look at the best technologies that are out there to to be able to deploy for a customer, but pre-building a lot of the integration to the key platforms they need, because often that's really where you're going to get the value out of the system. Because it is unfortunate if you try to approach it just as I buy this, I put it here, and I use this part of it, you're really not going to get the value out of it. So our focus tends to be more on how do we actually integrate in a lab the technology to other platforms that we can deploy quickly to a customer, and they can get a little more value out of it that way.
Right. Maybe before we close up this session, let's talk about what are maybe your best tips or your lessons learned. Maybe there's one, maybe there's several, on how you found to create a really successful lifecycle management strategy. I think a lot of things have come out while we've spoken too, but maybe everybody has a thing that they find, maybe they're just saying all the time, right? They're repeating it, or there's just a few things you'd like to share. You want to start over here?
So I think one of the things that we have discovered over the last few years is customers want to access technology, as we've discussed, in a variety of different ways, consume it in a variety of different ways. So we've really kind of restructured our business to be able to sell it to the customer, to the federal systems integrators, in a way that makes sense for them. Could be a CapEx solution, could be an OpEx solution, could be something that we do, that we make an investment with the systems integrator over time that we know is going to pay off in the long run. It's a little painful at the beginning, but providing that flexibility for procuring technology, I think, has been the biggest thing that's come out for us in the last few years.
I think it's all about strategy, getting folks to maybe push away from the table for a moment, have a conversation before we hop into a solution, and making sure we really understand what our objectives are, and the degree to which we can get everyone to get in the room and have that conversation first and not get wed to a platform or solution or a capability or a pain point that they want resolved. Just really, what do we want to accomplish? If we can get that piece first, then we've had a much more success. We can measure the kind of progress based off of whether or not that conversation has happened.
Then sometimes that's really hard because the pain points are often the thing that are just driving people to the table, right? And the goal out here, you got to get past those to even talk about it, you know?
No, I agree with what you're saying. So if you start to drive the conversation not from "I'd like this technology, we should buy it," to a "what are the mission outcomes I'm trying to achieve," and then map back from there your strategy and what's enabling technology to use. So definitely trying to drive towards more of the mission outcomes to start helps. Definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, and the way we've done that in most of our programs is to do something we call agile service delivery. So it's integrating agile processes into service strategy, service design. So evaluate kind of what's needed, allow the scrum, get to that point, and then focus in on the idle processes to get it out to transition and delivery so it's out there and it operates. The worst thing you can have is a bunch of shiny objects that work in a lab, don't work in real life. But the other problem can be standardize everything and nothing works. So you have to be able to have a process that allows for that.
Well, the agile process gives you that discovery phase, right?
Right.
So you're getting to that point of actually doing the discovery before you embark on that solution. So.
Are you finding that agencies, definitely agencies want to do it, right? They're still talking about it, but there's still challenges for a lot of organizations in allowing that kind of agile approach. Do you find that's sometimes a challenge for you?
Well, it depends. In DoD, it's already split, so you already have two groups fighting, operations versus projects. So you have to get those guys to talk together first. But the second thing is the process is really just getting in a collaboration environment to be able to talk to. Here's what I need. Here's what you got to have the security aspect to get it ATO'd. You got to have these functions for it to be any use. Let's take it to the farthest ends in some domain that is hostile fire. You got to be able to work, but then also be able to get everything deployed. So it really comes down to communication and being able to have those collaboration zones to do that.
I think the government's really, that whole idea of that authorization to operate, making that more agile has been a huge piece that's allowed some of this change to happen, right? And cloud kind of also forced people, they realized, oh, hell, we can't do it. We can't keep doing it that way.
Right.
We've got to make a change in how we're working. And you definitely see that agencies really want to move away from like waterfall, but some of the processes are harder to catch up, and the policies.
I would say most of our customers are already getting there, right? And even on ATO, like starting to implement a continuous ATO process and get out of that typical ATO cycle every time you're doing some major updates. So, being able to implement continuous ATO, a lot of them, from a DevSecOps approach, oftentimes that is a merger of both the contractor and government employees all participating on the same agile teams. But there's some great examples out there. It's starting to happen quite a bit. And they're also, with all the apps to cloud migrations, they're buying commercial sprints, right? They're doing agile sprints, and we have a very large business now doing that. So I think, they're getting really in tune with it. I think we're past that stage of the old traditional kind of waterfall approach.
Not resistance to it at all, right?
No.
It's just a matter of everybody kind of catching up so that it's doable easily.
That's how you frame it. We do something called ATO in a day, and what it is really ATO 7 months ago. It's just the checkbox is in a day.
But there are some challenges. When we think about cloud as an example, I think the government's done some fantastic things establishing standards around cloud use, cloud adoption, cloud security. Yet at the same time, some of those standards are actually beginning to lag behind what the commercial industry can receive. So I look at some of the GovCloud offerings, you would think that they would offer more secure environments. And in some cases, we're actually lagging because we can't get the updated policy and guidance in those government clouds to be equivalent to what the commercial clouds have. So we also need agility in the practices and policies that are coming out from OMB and some other organizations related to that.
That pace of change is always going to be a challenge in regards to that. It's just the commercial model moves so fast that it's just a struggle to keep up.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you all so much. That's where we're going to stop for this part one of the discussion. I hope you'll join us for this great lineup for the second half of our roundtable. I want to thank my four amazing enterprise infrastructure guests: Bernie Tomasky, the Vice President of Enterprise IT at SAIC; Cedric Sims, Senior Vice President of Enterprise Innovation and Integration at MITRE; Eric Nelson, Senior Vice President for CACI's Enterprise IT Operating Group, and Rick Schindel, Leader of Federal Systems Integrator Programs at FutureTech. Please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search FutureTech for more of our Delivering the Tech that Delivers for Government series. I'm Vanessa Roberts. Have a great day and see you soon on federalnewsnetwork.com.